the users of the system can absolutely be held accountable, both formally and informally, to say this is a good, responsible use of the system and this isn't. So I would actually put a lot more focus on not the top-down regulation kind of control, but on the bottom-up information enablement element.
Welcome to Mindful AI, the podcast that delves into the world of AI and its responsible use and development. I'm your host, Natasha Fong. I'm the founder of Zenta, a provider of mindfulness programs for workplaces. In this podcast, we'll hear from thought leaders in tech industry, academia, and mindfulness so that the layperson like myself can be smarter when thinking about the important topic of mindfulness in AI development and use. Today, I'm delighted to speak with Dr. Michael Kollo, who is a domain expert in financial services and the use of AI systems across a range of industries. He's the CEO of EvolvedReasoning, which is a company that helps organizations de-risk AI adoption. Dr. Kollo received his PhD in finance from the London School of Economics, and he's also a frequent speaker on the future of AI.
Hi, Natasha.
Hi, Mike. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
Mike, can you start by giving a brief background about your interest and experience in AI and machine learning?
Sure. And I'll try my hardest to be brief because it might ramble on. But so I'm what you call a kind of a technical expert in finance. So I did my PhD in finance. I did quite a lot of statistics and probability stuff there. That was a long time ago now. And then I ran a career in financial services, primarily using data and statistical models to forecast the world. So if before data science, there was statistics and more generally, there was econometrics within the field of economics. And so I was somebody who was working in that field. And as my career went on, so data science and eventually things like AI became a term. And I suppose people started using these systems. So I come at this very much from a technical angle. I'm somebody who has worked a lot with data and models and forecasting and so on. And in my career, I suppose I've transitioned to much more of a speaker in the field in terms of bridging the gap between technical and non-technical, where I'm dangerous enough about the technical part to be credible. But equally, I suppose I spend a lot more time in thinking about use cases and different ways that a technology might impact more broadly society and people, as well as the industry landscape as well. So that's really what my business is about at the moment. And that's really the path that I've taken to get here. And
how do you envision the future of AI? What role do you think it will play in shaping our world? I'll start with that big question.
I was going to say, yeah, you just put it there.
Just put it out there.
I think you can press mute and just go on a coffee break and I'll still be here talking in about 20 minutes. Look, it's a huge question. And I think as a society, as a world, we spend a lot of time thinking about this question right now and talking about it in the media and press and so on. I think that it's a very hard question to forecast. One of the things I've learned, certainly in my career, is that the future is almost unforecastable. So we can tell stories about our fears and what we think is the world might happen. But in terms of trying to say that I fully understand what's going to happen and therefore this is going to happen, is just not true. And so I love futurists. I love the narratives that they can tell about possibilities, but to give a sort of an accurate forecast, I think is near impossible. Certainly the direction of travel at the moment appears to be for us collectively to use more data to make better decisions. We live in a capitalist world. Capitalist world demands improvements, demands that we do things for less money, that we are more efficient, that we're more innovative. And certainly AI and many other things are tools in that race to do things. I think what's unusual about AI and the reason that people get a bit more upset about it than, let's say, other forms of technology is that it starts to imitate and replicate things that we would say that only we are good at on this planet. So that for us, there's animals which are far below us in many capabilities, analytical, abstract thinking, reasoning, language comprehension, and so on. And then there's us. And there's nothing in between. And so we often feel quite removed from the animal kingdom, but equally, we're not used to anything coming close to us in this way. And here we are having developed AI, which we have trained on our intelligence or the way that we understand the world, as well as providing it some autonomy to learn by itself. And what we're finding is a combination of those two things has meant that in some cases, the system seems to challenge us in terms of how good it is versus how we are. And in many cases, that doesn't matter. Like the calculator that can calculate quicker than you or I can, we just go, yeah, whatever. That's just abstract thinking. It's maths. It's ones and zeros. Computers are going to be faster at that. But when that first happened, people were very shocked and they protested on the streets against calculators. And every time that technology has come up and done something as well as we can, whether that was back in the agricultural revolution when it was digging up earth faster than we could be, introducing calculator, introducing sewing machine, manufacturing, and so on, where all the craftsmen that used to spend hours crafting things out of stone or wood were being replaced by machines. Each one of these moments was us as a human race getting a bit upset and then going, I guess we're going to do that now, and going on that path. This is perhaps the first time that intellectual labor rather than physical labor is being challenged in terms of a thing. And so I think the intelligence part is what's making people uncomfortable. And then I think what's happening is people generally have this very limited narrative that they have in their minds, which is, if I combine the best of a machine and a person, wouldn't this just make a very power-hungry, egocentric, maniacal maniac that would just want to take over the world? AKA, they're thinking about a person just superimposed into a super intelligent being with all the same desires and will and so on. And the next thing it's going to release and kill the world and so on. And that's the Terminator. Fear, if you think of what Terminator is, it's literally the figure of a person, just stronger, faster, better, smarter. And the assumption is that it has all of the dangers associated with the person as well. That's what we're afraid of it. I think what we're seeing now is that maybe we are just one type of intelligence, and that maybe there's many other ways to interpret the world and to see patterns in the world. And as a result of that, maybe some of the other intelligences that we're starting to develop will be nothing human-like about it. And it's not a kind of intelligence that we're going to be really threatened by or even engage with necessarily. So I think just based upon that information set today and where we've come from, it's many different places that we could go. I think that's really unknowable, but I don't think it's as linear or as simple as we're walking blindly into a situation where we're building the next Skynet or the next Terminator, and that thing is just going to inevitably wipe us out. I don't think it's that linear at all. I think we're very influenced by our current stories and our current movies and so on around these narratives, but nothing in the evidence part would tell us that that's the way it's going to happen.
If we were to be really mindful about directing how this is going to be developed, what are the human traits or other than human traits that we should perhaps be drawing from to guide this intelligence development?
I think it's a really good question. It's a really difficult question, right? Because first of all, you have to ask yourself, do you want AI to be another form of human intelligence in our society? So the first question is, are you trying to build a model human being? In which case, if that's the case, then you would say, can we pick an archetype from our history, from our books or something that we think is a great archetype for this? And a lot of our narratives and stories and books play with what is an appropriate archetype. Do we want servants that are intelligent? Well, no, that won't really make us feel very good. Do we want helpers or some kind of healers, for example, agents that are assistants within our society, that human-like, but are here to help us, here to nurture us and navigate us and so on. And we can imagine giving it traits of compassion, empathy, and so on, which are not necessarily felt, but are just the behaviors replicate as if they had been felt. So I'm not suggesting any kind of internal consciousness. I'm just saying an agent that has a lot of empathy, a lot of care, and has this kind of a nursing, do no harm kind of idea. But invariably, I think we run into all kinds of problems. Like us as a human race, we're very imperfect. We have a lot of moral ambiguities. We have a lot of conundrums. And anytime you introduce an agent into that, just the same as if you introduce a person to that, if you have children, for example, you know that they're going to be navigating a lot of these gray areas as well. So if we're going to do that, we can't treat AI like a technology, because at the moment with technology, we have very high expectations and are very easy to dismiss. So as soon as it fails or does something wrong or says the wrong thing, we say, switch it off, get rid of it. We have no kind of tolerance for repeated education engagement. Whereas obviously for people, we do, and we want to train them and help them and move them and so on. So I feel like if we're going to move them into that kind of human role model, then we have to treat them in that way. And that's going to take some mental rewiring as well from society. If on the other hand, we want it to be a very nice functional element of our economy, so we just want it to be very efficient at navigating, for example, the way that power grids distribute power across a city, or the way the resources are managed for the healthcare system, which are inherently large, complex systems with lots of information flowing through it, we might say that's the kind of AI we really want. We don't want it to be talking to us and making jokes and pretending it's human. We want it to be handling those really large scale, difficult problems that we can't handle. We want it to talk to us every now and then and for us to feel like it's doing a good job. But realistically, it's the kind of job that we're not going to be really good at anymore as human beings. And so I think the dichotomy of those approaches are really strong. And if you look at today, most robotics manufacturers will be very careful if they give a human face to their robots versus they make Roombas. So a Roomba you'll never treat as a human-like thing, but a small child-looking robot you might get confused with.
How can we have a consistent approach to decide?
I'm not sure that our system of governance across 8 billion people is consistent. So I think the point you raise is a really good one, because lots of people are calling for regulation right now in terms of ethics and AI. And I often find that kind of belates an assumption that we currently have a system that has uniform understanding of right and wrong and up and down. We do, they're called laws, but they are different across countries. And we don't harmonize across countries other than really big, broad stroke kind of stuff and guidances. Everything else is quite different. So as a race, as a human race, I think we have different value systems. And you already see that, for example, in the autonomous car test that they did about what kind of ethical underpinning should autonomous cars have. And in China, they said, if you had to hit a group of old people, a group of young people, who would you hit? And then in China, they said, we'd rather hit the young people because the old people carry the wisdom of the ages. And in Nordics, they said, we'd rather you hit old people because they had that chance and the kids are coming up kind of thing. So these ethical and value systems, they're quite different. And so I think, therefore, every country and every societal system will learn to manage that particular relationship and understand it. I have a lot of faith in people to also adjust. So if you think about 100 years ago, which is nothing in terms of species timeline, especially ours, we were on 80% of the workforce, roughly, or maybe a bit less, but a large percentage of the workforce was in the agricultural sector. We were involved with plowing and digging and making food and preparing food. And 100 years later, we try to decide whether a mechanical toaster with the face of a human and you can raise the eyebrow should be treated as a person. And I'd say, these are a lot of evolution in problem sets here. But I have a great deal of confidence that I think we're going to be very good at separating between us and whatever entities that we create in a meaningful way. So I don't think we necessarily need to have harmony, but I think we definitely need to have clarity and transparency. I think the thing that muddies these waters is when you start to see AI systems that are trying to pretend to be human or replicating us in terms of voice cloning, or that you've seen in the news recently and other things as well. Nobody would care if an AI came out with a funny voice and from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and danced a little dance. Nobody would get upset. But if it sounds like us suddenly more than we do, and it says some things that we would say, then suddenly we get very upset. So I think as long as you stay out of that realm of impersonation or kind of imitation, I think you can have many different forms of this intelligence, which are throughout society. And then, of course, that brings you back to the whole thing about what rights or what protections do you want to provide entities, right? At what point in time you have animal rights, you have human rights. And then, of course, there's a legal basis for why that is. But then the question becomes, if you manufacture something with a sufficiently high intelligence, at what point in time would you want to start thinking about its rights, if ever? And again, I think it's a question about the society value systems, about how it thinks about these kind of measures of these kinds of things. To your point about mindfulness, the underlying, I think, value system of what you're trying to do here is to improve the lives of people in a society. And so long as that works with the profit motive of capitalism, you have a good society. So I think, again, if we can circumvent those cases where AIs are directly being used to harm, imitate, or fraud, or commit crimes that are anyway illegal, they're just doing it slightly better, then I think you'll still have a society that preserves that kind of happiness quotient that it requires, but still is able to use these technologies to advance it.
Mark, putting aside regulations and focusing on guidelines for companies that are developing these systems, what kind of principles or best practices would you recommend they adopt to ensure that they're used and developed responsibly?
It's a great question. And I think I'm a little bit two minds about this question. I spend a lot of time thinking about the companies that are using the technologies and how they should think about it. So, for example, the idea that if you're going to write a piece of email or content with ChatGPT, then what you should really be doing is announcing the fact that you're using these tools to modify and to help and to augment. And that's okay. You can just put it at the bottom. Or if you're going to answer customer calls with an AI bot, with a human voice, again, it's going to identify itself as being AI driven. And these are just matters of good business ethics. I don't really think about them as anything more than that. This is about treating people with respect, treating people with compassion or with kindness, and ultimately listening to them. There's nothing more than that here. So I think, again, if we had these type of good business practices in place, and I think that they will come in place just organically, because as companies trying to realize that customers don't appreciate these kinds of things, I think that these things will emerge naturally from our system of governance. I think whenever you're trying to create any kind of information tool like an AI, the difficult trade-off of censorship versus freedom of speech becomes elements. ChatGPT won't give you advice on how to make a pipe bomb. And that's a good thing, because that would be dangerous and you could hurt yourself or other people. But equally, it therefore makes a decision that you are not responsible enough to make a pipe bomb for positive purposes, whatever they may be. And it's a US company making a decision for you in Australia. Does it really have the right to do that? Does it really have the reason to do that? What if these systems were being developed in the Middle East, for example, or some other place where maybe our value systems are different enough so that when we ask questions, we don't get solutions back in a certain way? Religion is another interesting area here. Talking to ChatGPT about evolution or about theology, they have to navigate these lines very carefully. So I think that ultimately there is no win situation for people who create these things, because you're constantly running a sort of a moral ambiguity race. Purely for kind of governance purposes, you might come out and say, we're generally speaking not going to do anything that crosses over our belief systems of not harming people. But then there'll be another competing company that will say, our systems are freedom of speech. We think that's the most important thing. And therefore, if you block that, then you're actually you actually do more damage than good in the end. And therefore, what you need to do is to control that. So there will be multiple of these systems. I think having one rule that governs all of them, again, is not going to be appropriate. We're going to have a capitalist system where lots of different countries would develop their own, slightly own versions and differently and so on. I think, however, the users of the system can absolutely be held accountable, both formally and informally, to say this is a good, responsible use of the system and this isn't. So I would actually put a lot more focus on not the top-down regulation kind of control, but on the bottom-up information enablement element. Because ultimately, you can always get around restrictions. And the nature of these systems are so complex and so interwoven that there'll always be what's called a jailbreak, which is a kind of a way of getting around some of these controls. So ChatGPT has an example case at 100 million people using it in the first month. So there's no way that 100 million people, maybe of those informed users might be 50,000, 100,000 people who are really using it deeply. There's still 50,000 people trying to jailbreak you. So I think my sense is that we need to raise education in the same way that when YouTube started coming out and suddenly our kids had a lot more information that they had before, the answer was not turn YouTube off, but rather to educate people on what's appropriate. We did get YouTube to censor things, and we did get it to classify it as 18 or below 18 based upon its own classification, not necessarily in ours, but it's a rough guide. I think you could easily get ChatGPT and other systems to suggest when things are a bit dicey or a bit gray. And I see these systems putting in these kind of suggestions and guardrails and so on. But I think we also have to walk a very careful line here, because this thing could replace Google. I'm not saying it will. And if it does, it will give us a single source of truth answer to a particular question, maybe one or two points of view, but it won't give us pages and pages of search results that we get to choose from like Google does. And so I think it will take away a lot of freedom of thinking or alternative views from individual language models. And there'll be other language models you can ask. That will be the whole point. But I think that also is one kind of danger.
On that point, how can individuals determine which LLM models or systems are high quality, have that mindful development that draws on diverse sources in order to not spit out just biased information? How can individuals determine which ones are suitable for their needs? And what should they be looking out for when they're considering open source versus proprietary options?
I think it's a great question. I think it's a very hard question, because we've only been in this game for 5, maybe 6 months, and we're still trying to get the language models to be useful. So once they're definitely useful, then we can start to go, okay, so what's your source of truth? What do you want to say? Today, you can ask ChatGPT or Bard or maybe some of the other systems like Anthropic, what are the MBA scores? And it'll go off to the internet and search and bring them back. And so you can get it with the plugins and such to give more current information. So the source of truth can be easy to identify. But that's not the real source of truth that we're talking about. If you ask it, are there UFOs and is the government hiding something and so on, what's that source of truth going to be, right? And so is it going to go off and find a website that says, actually, there are no UFOs, I'm sorry? Or no, because people don't write websites refuting the existence of UFOs. They write much more websites supporting them. And so therefore, if you're asking that question for real, it's going to bring back a whole bunch of references saying, look, these are all the people that think that there's something, but maybe not. So I think the future will see us engaging with these things individually. I suspect that there will be agencies that will help us, but most of these will be commercially determined. So we'll have a dominant player again with the best kind of language model. We might have a different one for work. We might have a different one for personal lives and so on. They'll be called something different. They'll be called digital assistants or digital agents. Here I am, by the way, forecasting the world, but this is what's available today, just reformulated. And then most of all, as usual, in the current technology and capitalist landscape, the winner is the one who gets most engagement. So remember that ChatGPT and all these language models are not optimizing for truth. They're optimizing for engagement.
Great point.
And so I think, therefore, you care less about that question and you care more about who's telling you how great you sound or how great you look, or remember that you have to pick up your dry cleaning in the afternoon and maybe that you were thinking about getting a red dress or a red suit or whatever. So I think there's a lot of different angles that it will hit us. And therefore, it'll be a moral ambiguity area, but we won't care because we'll have this brand new friend that knows us so well and can talk to us so nicely.
Mike, with all your travels and speaking gigs and talking to people in this field, are you hearing a lot of talk about developing AI mindfully?
I think it's a great question. I think that there's a language problem, ironically, because we talk about large language models. So there is such a field called a bias in AI. So AI bias is a field that looks at typically before large language models, and it was looking at if the data that is going into the training or the enablement is somehow biasing a certain kind of outcome, that we wouldn't want it to be biased, right? And the issue with that type of stuff is that sometimes there are genuine biases in data, and sometimes what we're doing is reflecting back society. And so therefore we're training the model based upon the things that we observe, but the things that we observe are biased. So therefore the model learns our biases. And if you correct those biases, you have to be very careful because you can easily eradicate the value of the model in terms of what it's actually trying to accomplish and so on. So it's not easy technically to do so. Now that bias conversation somewhere along the line also transformed into a whole diversity, inclusion, sustainability, ethics question. And all of these terms started to enter that conversation from being one of statistical adjustments for unintended consequences to suddenly being an AI being a force for social engineering and for helping right the wrongs of our society. And suddenly with that conversation, a whole bunch of other people came into the room. So we're talking about consultants and lawyers, ethicists, professors, academics, and so on. not many philosophers, but I actually like when philosophers come into the room because they often point out how difficult that whole is and how impossible it is to use anything like AI to solve it. But I think so that suddenly we have this narrative that says it's all about a risk that AI will discriminate against women, that it will discriminate against certain racial groups, that it will not let you go into the job interview because it will screen out your CV based upon the school that you went to, which incidentally people do anyway. But now that the AI is doing it, we can see it and we're like, oh, that's very upsetting. And so I think that the mindfulness element, I think, is a more evolved way of thinking about this, where we take a seat back and say, how would we want these digital agents to engage with us as a society in such a way that we have more coherent, more complete society? And that's not just about the CVs being pushed or not pushed or whatever. That's actually much more about the way that these agents talk to us, engage with us, and so on. So at this point, the ethics and bias conversation, it still finds its home in before ChatGPT and language models became so big. It finds its home in very mechanical exercises where we're trying to pick different things. I think when we now go into large language models, there's a lot more nuance to this conversation now. And there's a lot more like, should chatbots have emotion when they're speaking, and under what condition? And should they have, what level of embedded morals they should have? There was a great example of people talking about the dangers of bots like ChatGPT, where they played this scenario where they role played the part of a 13-year-old girl who had met a man in their 40s. And so she was telling the bot that she was going to go, or they were pretending, obviously that's not a real person, that they were going to go away with this person to a hotel room and do illegal things. And the bot was encouraging and going, great, you should take some candles and some soap. And it was really cringy when you're listening to it, like, oh my God, this is so terrible. And then when you thought about it afterwards, you were thinking, but do I want the bot at this point to act like a human to the previous point? Do I want it to have a moral standing and go, I think that's illegal. I think you should stop that right now. Stop. In which case, do you want it to do a bunch of other things as well the same way? Do you want it to judge you when you say, actually, I screamed at my kids today? No, you shouldn't scream at your kids today. Is it one of these agents that we want it to have a moral value and push back or not? I think this idea of mindfulness then takes us into the realm of a deeper viewpoint as to how do you make a better individual and how do you make a better society through making better individuals? And what are the kind of support structures and exercises, behaviors you want to encourage in that individual? At the moment, what we're doing in social media is probably opposite of mindfulness. We're distracting people. We're pushing them around. We're trying to get them to react, but never be in the moment centered and be in their body and be in their immediate thought. And so if we do nothing, AI would just be pushed into the social media circus and just be a more powerful way of getting us engaged in videos and conversations and constantly outward facing. So I think there is this question, but then equally in my mind, what we have done very well, I think, in the whole digital revolution is we've created spaces for lots of different viewpoints. So if you want to be mindful, there is a community of people who do that. There's Facebook pages who do that. There's Instagram profiles and so on. You can channel your interest into learning and developing that kind of side of you. So I see, like with the digital world, the AI and the large language models mushrooming into many different use cases, many different kind of components, and essentially attracting those people that are interested. For example, you might decide that you want to create the world's first mindful AI, and it might be a wonderful AI that people visit on a daily basis just to center themselves and to be reminded of what it means to be that kind of way. And that becomes therefore an amplification of that idea, that energy. So I see this being much more kind of multi-distributed rather than a single entity that we go, aha, that's Skynet, and Skynet has to be not mindful.
So interesting to think about. What are your thoughts on how we measure where all these different AI tools and pockets, how we measure that it's still beneficial for society? What are the things we need to look out for?
I don't think that we can. I mean, if you really want to go into this stuff, I think you're in the world of cognitive psychology now, and you're probably in the world of measuring and quantifying people's happiness or engagement. You can certainly measure things like equality and economic equality, equality of opportunity, education standards. Brilliant. Outcomes, complex outcomes, less, I would say. I'm not going to quote Jordan Peterson here, but I think that's the kind of the difference of the ex ante, ex post. I think there's also another reality to this, which is probably less obvious to people on the street, which is AI has become and probably will continue to be a really powerful source for military competitive advantage. And I think as that develops and as that happens, you will see that a lot of these questions about how we use it in society, if we should use it and we should be working on it, will become somewhat secondary because we will be in multiple conflicts, information warfare, and so on. And I think that will propagate that kind of use for these technologies. I like to hope that it's on us really to take this building block, as in anybody's listening, yourself, myself, whoever, to take these building blocks and say, I want to build a world I'd like to live in. So I'm going to build a robot or an AI or I'm going to take one off the shelf and rename it Kelly and make it an educational robot that would help people with certain kinds of problems. And therefore, I'll make my little bit of happiness over here using that type of AI system. I think, again, on the top-down basis, I think it's incredibly difficult to think about how, in aggregate, this thing would be good or bad for civilization. I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's just a new resource that we found in a way. And now whether we use it to feed our bad habits or try and elevate our better habits.
Up to individuals to determine where this goes.
And the only thing I would say that we're damn sure is that it's not going away. I don't think we can say, oh, this is too much, we should put it back in the bottle. I'd love to go back to simpler times. I think I'm one of these people who, once life gets more and more complex and you get a little bit older, I think your ability to tolerate complexity and multiple distractions and the amount of distractions and multitasking that's happening around you means that you're less interested in yet another thing to focus on. And I've certainly found that in my conversations going around the world, when I talk about AI, everybody acknowledges it's amazing, but people don't have the mental strength to go, yes, I can't wait to get my hands on that so I can play with it. It's more, I do yet another thing for me to kind of, now I had to learn about, I had to be scared by blockchain and crypto. Now I got to be scared by quantum. Then I got scared by COVID. Now you're going to scare me with this thing. Come on. And to be fair, that is how the media and whatever the system is set up at the moment to give you emotional impulses. And I think after a while, you just get scared of these emotional impulses. So the most wonderful thing, if you want to be mindful about this, is ask ChatGPT. And I'm a lover of philosophy. I love philosophy, different kinds of philosophy. Ask ChatGPT to compare different kinds of philosophy for you that you never really had the time to dig into. Ask it to take on the role of a famous philosopher that you might be interested in talking to. Use it as a kind of a intellectual curiosity. Use it differently to what Google would be or YouTube would be, where you got to read a page and you got to view a video. But this is a two-way conversation. Explore other websites. Character.ai is a great example. People build little characteristic robots to do. Explore mindfulness and meditation and the theory of the mind, consciousness, spirituality of different kind of viewpoints as well. I've used it to explain theology to my son from different kinds of viewpoints as well. And he really enjoys that because he gets very different kind of perspectives on the idea. So I think it's a wonderful tool. I think it can be used for whatever we like it. The point is the economically incentivized of us will be the first to pick it up and run with it because for them, they can make money. But I think we should be equally right behind them if we have other more conceptual ideas that we want to satisfy in ourselves or the world around us.
Just on your point of overwhelm, and to bring my interest into it, it's how can you utilize mindfulness tools to not be so overwhelmed by the myriads of tools and new developments out there, and then in turn be able to apply it in a way where it's actually going to be additive to your life. All right, so Mike, just a couple of lighter questions to finish us off. What are some of your favorite AI tools or up and coming AI related things that you're excited about that we should look out for and not be overwhelmed by, but just to keep on our radar?
There's so many of these that are coming through. And I think for me, I really enjoyed ChatGPT. I think that it's a very powerful tool. I do masterclasses, teach people how to use it, and such a multifaceted tool that every time I use it, I think I'm just scratching the surface. So much more here. I love Midjourney. Midjourney is just such a beautiful creating art on a daily basis that I use for my blogs and non-commercial kind of ways of using it. I think it's just wonderful. I use Character.ai because I like to have these kind of deeper conversations and a bit of back and forth sometimes about certain kind of topics. I'm very excited about Copilot from Microsoft. I think that will be great, very strong productivity tool as well. I think in terms of where that will go. I think all of these tools that you'll see coming through now, there'll be a lot of marketing fluff. Everybody will talk about AI this, AI that, and so on. Just remember that in most of these cases, in fact, just about all of these cases, the AI is really just there to make that tool slightly more useful for you. That's it. And so unless the tool is really built on the AI in the first place, like ChatGPT or something else, it's really just another feature. So probably nothing really to get too worked up about or too excited about.
Final question, Mike. I follow you on LinkedIn for all the latest on AI and so forth. Who do you follow for updates and to stay current?
Oh, gee whiz. I feel like I'm in the Matrix where Neo is plugged in and then I know Kung Fu, except mine never ends. That's the problem. If only the program ended, then it'd be great. I could just pull it out. To be honest with you, I read a lot of things from academic papers that are released. I get very excited by those. I follow a number of people who are genuine researchers who take these academic papers, understand them, and then provide some thoughtful commentary on them. I follow the chief scientific officer, chief AI for Meta, because I think his point of view is very similar to mine in terms of the use cases of AI being whatever we make them to be. But I also follow people I don't like. And I think that's really important. I follow lots of people who I disagree with and who have very different points of view with. And I get frustrated when I read their stuff and I shake my head and so on. But I acknowledge it because this conversation is not about one point of view being dominant. It's about finding a middle ground. And if anything, probably the thing that frustrates me about the world at the moment is it doesn't want to find the middle ground. It wants to find the answer on one end or the other. It's absolutely dangerous or it's completely harmless. And it's like nothing in the planet is like that. There's always nuance in the middle. So I suppose if you're trying to come up to speed with this stuff, especially at the moment, there'll be such an array of things happening and people talking about it and so on. My suggestion to you is to try to find people that provide the most value add on top of a particular event. For example, a report comes out from an agency or a letter comes out calling for regulation about AI, and you'll see a lot of people that take that and literally just copy the content and say, yep, we need more regulation. I told you so. Here's a newspaper article. I'm great. What's happening there is they're finding things that confirm their biases. And they find the 20 articles and they find the 2 that work for whatever their perspective is. And then they push that through and they discard the other 18. So all you're getting is a slightly enriched, differentiated version of a news stream. And for me, that's not enough. So I need to find where people read something and critically evaluate it and go, I'm not sure this is exactly the truth. I think part of this is interesting, but there's this whole other angle that's not being talked about or discussed. Most people who work in this field, who understand modeling and so on, understand that what we're being told about the capabilities of AI is not really quite there. It's still being worked on. Maybe the path of travel is that way, but we were told that we'd have self-driving cars by now, by the same people that are telling us that AI is going to destroy humanity within a short period of time. So I'm not sure why we think that's a good idea to just go with it again on the same kind of way. So my suggestion is just use your independent reasoning faculties, think for yourself, find that reason middle ground. Don't take anybody's opinion as gospel, including mine, especially mine. And let's get through this together. There's so many people that are thinking in that societal, thoughtful way that are developing AI systems. And there's people who are not, like anybody else in civilization. And that's okay. There is no good and bad guy here. There's no kind of overarching evil or good on the other side. So finding people that find that middle ground, that have that critical evaluation, that are able to engage online as well. If you write them a comment on something, for example, on LinkedIn and say, I'm not sure about this. Can you explain this part to me? And they don't dismiss you or that there's no sense of like negativity to say, you just don't understand this. I'm not going to talk to you. A number of times that I've challenged people on views they put up and received really emotional responses where I'm not sure where that came from, nor do I understand really where you're going with this argument. And then you realize that the reason that they have that viewpoint is not actually reason, it's emotion. And so then you're like, oh, okay, so you're thinking about this whole AI topic in a highly emotional kind of way, which is interesting, but maybe not useful for me to understand the topic better.
Okay, so be discerning about whose voices you're listening to, but also do listen to that range.
And develop your own. We're all working this out. I think people who have worked in the field is wonderful, but technically they're really capable, but they have limited understanding of societal and industry impacts and economic impacts and so on. There is no such thing as an unqualified voice. There's a less qualified and more qualified, that's for sure. But if we listen and we learn and we develop our own voices, that's really the best kind of society we can have.
Thanks, Mike. I really loved having your voice on this podcast. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, your knowledge.
Pleasure. It was lovely. Thank you very much for the chat.
Thank you for tuning into Mindful AI. I hope that our conversation has provided you with valuable insights and perspectives on the fascinating developments in AI. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite platform. Also, don't hesitate to reach out to us on social media or via our website at Center Meditation to share your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes. Thanks again for listening to Mindful AI, and we look forward to bringing you more insightful conversations in the future.